Hi everyone. This is the first section, the Late Middle Ages notes, and it starts off looking like this, just a background of what this class is. So let's get to it. We're actually going to skip over some of this logistical, you know, what the test looks like stuff to get to the history. There it is. All right, so we're talking about life really before that, what we consider to be a more time of awakening. So this is before the Renaissance, late Middle Ages. And this is a time of feudal societies, that medieval class structure. Feudalism, sometimes referred to as manorialism, where people who were peasants were tied to the land, were unpaid laborers, and essentially those serfs are slaves that work for the nobility, the clergy, and the king. So when we think about, a lot of people think of like the French Revolution and thinking of peasants and what that lifestyle was like and that social structure was like, and it's very similar. However, these peasants did not have the freedom to roam land, and they could not own land, and they did not, I guess, essentially pay taxes. However, they were people that were at the bottom of the social standing, essentially starved to death and worked to death. So basic feudalism is going to develop because of a breakdown of law and order between 980 and 1030. And again, these people are like tied to the economy. And this really was a reaction to the fall of the Roman Empire. So there's great poverty. There's going to be individuals who maintain wealth, and this is all about how to get people to work the land during this dark time in history. The late Middle Ages, as we are moving toward the 14th century and we are getting into 15th century, there's going to be all kinds of economic disasters. The Black Death is going to be a great impactful event that changes society. Obviously, we know the population greatly declined during the Black Death, but obviously that occurred because we are starting to connect and navigate the world during this, and it changes how society deals with major events, and then again how society is shaped ultimately. Actually, you can watch this one on your own, but yes. So manorialism is that economic system, the big manor. You think of that peasant lifestyle, and we have very um, archaic tools, if you will, with like the hand plows and things like that. So we have this agricultural economy, and we have this growth of some urban areas, some skilled workers with guilds. If you guys are like me and you're on that Forge of Empires or Clash of Clans or World of Warcraft, I mean, you guys probably understand guilds. It's basically just a way to work together for a common good to protect your skill, and to kind of like raise honor to that. Those skilled workers, although are still low class, are considered higher up than the agricultural workers. And there's also going to be a lot more like actual money that's exchanged during the late Middle Ages than before, because we're going to see trading, like I said, global trade with that money economy, and it's going to increase credit and banking. So in the German areas, they were actually credited with being the first place to utilize banking, and so like in the Holy Roman Empire. And because the principalities relied on intertrade, they a lot of times had to establish some way of currency to give loans and things like that. And that's where banking actually is born in Central Europe. The church had a lot of controversy in the late Middle Ages. So this is when we're going to see this whole idea of like the papal rule and different legal systems for people who are part of the clergy. Obviously, during this, like I refer to it as a dark time in history, we're going to see a lot of people relying on the church for guidance and for answers because life is really bad. So people look to the church as like the explanation as to why life was so terrible. People felt like at the mercy of the church. So people tithed, so people would pay taxes to the church. Um, if you were going or speaking against the church, if you refused to tithe, you would be disciplined, you'd be excommunicated, or you would not be able to receive a sacrament, or you'd be tried for heresy. And people were really afraid because if you didn't get to heaven, then you weren't going to be reconnected with your family. You weren't going to be living this good life. So a lot of people lived in fear of the church. So you can look at this. We're going to let you guys listen to that at a different time. Um, other things that happen are the Hundred Years' War, which we're going to talk a little bit about in class together, and obviously the Black Death. We're going to get into this stuff too. So during the Hundred Years' War, we have this character, Joan of Arc, and you guys probably remember her from history just because she is a female, and it's like one of the only females in world history that's ever taught. She believed that it was her job to reinstate the King of France, and she dressed as a male and she led French soldiers fighting for French independence from Great Britain at this time. And she actually was tried for heresy by the British, not by the French. So, good to know character. France, during this Hundred Years' War, again, the English claimed throne to France, and France was looking to appoint their next monarch in power. He was not a very strong character. However, in terms of what you need to know for the AP test, you need to know the Hundred Years' War occurred, that Joan of Arc was part of it, and that it ends up, you know, England does have to leave. But otherwise, it's pretty much ignored for the most part because it's so early on in history. So this is what it is. Edward III claims the throne of France, but it does not end up that way. So what ends up occurring though, because of this, that's good to know, is that it really cements this concept of a unified England. So it actually changes more things in the English Isles than it does in France. However, it obviously creates that animosity that we know through history between France and England. France being fearful of England coming back over, building up arms, doing things to, like, obviously rebut whatever England is saying. So it creates frictions between these two nations for a long period of time in history, really up until World War I. So here's some late Middle Age artwork. We just need to talk about it really briefly because it's really two-dimensional. And when we talk about the Renaissance, we're going to be talking about some differences between this. A lot of the artwork during the late Middle Ages is showing how people react with their sacraments. So, and what like the fear of death or the devil will do with you. So a lot of the artwork that you would see in churches and things like that are to convey what the messages of the Bibles were without actually like having words with them, because most people weren't literate during the late Middle Ages. So it really is like biblical stories, a lot again, a way of convincing people if you do this, then you won't be able to do this. So if you're tempted by the devil here, see he's all in knots, then you won't be able to walk with God. The Black Death is going to be spreading. It's going to come in through Italy, through those trading ports, and then it's going to eventually reach all the way to like the north regions up here of Scandinavia. Um, Ring Around the Rosie, Pocket Full of Posy, the great population decline. There's been a lot of science that studied this. Is it the fleas on the rats? Well, that's what we were originally told, but more recently, it's actually been found that it was the saliva of the rats as they were infected by the fleas. So not the fleas themselves, but the saliva of the rats that actually spread the Black Death. So along with the Black Death, there was a famine that occurred. And then the bubonic plague was part of this. Septicemia, which is a blood-borne pathogen. Basically, when your body becomes backed up, it can leach into your blood and then poison you. By 1350, a third of all Europeans die of the Black Death or something related to the Black Death. And it really ends up weakening the church. It destroys feudalism. it changes the political structure of Europe, and it changes how people think about their lives. So there's going to be outbreaks of war, really good, like, I mean, really interesting artwork, two-dimensional, again, showing all this. And the peasant revolts are part of this. So as really bad things happen, the upper class, like during the Black Death, look to the peasants. They look to bring back slavery essentially with this feudalism because they need free labor, they need money, and it causes peasant revolts to occur. So we have the Jacquerie, which is when that French nobility try to bring back this feudalism. And then we have another peasant revolt in England where it's very similar. And the struggle between the church is really because taxation again becomes a huge issue. The church runs on tithing from people, and if it's not occurring, then what happens is the church is not able to run. So we're going to have some different views on what the church should be, and it's going to lead to a break, the schism in the church, which is this whole idea of the Babylonian captivity. So the papal court basically moves to Avignon because things are not safe. And there's this whole idea that there is a rightful pope and a wrongful pope. So we have Clement V, French, he's elected pope, and he decides that they're going to move from the papal states up to Avignon in France. And they're like, no, you can't move. You can't move the pope. Like, we can't have this. So what happens is there's going to be this idea of these two popes. So Urban VI is elected in Rome because Italy is like, we can't be losing our pope. The pope lives in the papal states. And then in France, they have the Avignon pope. So they're like, no, now the pope lives in France. So then there's this like third pope, Alexander V, who's, in the Holy Roman Empire. And the Great Schism is when there are multiple popes, many pope problems. So people are like, wow, maybe there is something wrong with Roman Catholicism, with the Catholic Church, because people are just becoming the holy left and right here. People start to lose faith. So the conciliar movement is really about bringing the idea of just having one pope and having that pope be the pope. And what ends up happening is Alexander V is elected, and the other two popes like refuse to step down, and eventually they are forced to step down, and the Great Schism ends. So we have to have this supremacy, only one supreme pope leader. Okay, so that is moving the pope back to the papal states, and just like having one. Okay, and there's different allegiances, so you guys can look at these maps more close. Other things that occur is this whole schism really just gets people to start talking about the Bible in different ways. Maybe the Bible's the authority. Maybe we don't need a pope. Maybe we should just listen to the Bible opposed to the clergy members. John Huss of Bohemia, he's like, why do we have to listen to the Pope speak solely in Latin? Perhaps the Pope or a Bible should be better in the vernacular, in the regular language. So all of these different movements are going to give birth and light to the Protestant Reformation that we're going to talk about soon. And that's all. So that was super fast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You can read it in closer depth on your own.